Hey, Whiskey Ringers, more updates coming your way. First off, the Jack Daniels barrels are totally sold out. These went in about a week and a half at most. If you haven't received your bottle stickers, please reach out to me with your address and how many you got, and I'll be happy to get those to you as soon as possible. Next up, our current single barrel, the Podcaster Yak Attack, a barrel rye finished in Armagnac Casks, picked in partnership with This Is My Bourbon podcast, is live and available on my site. You can go to stores.mashnetworks.co, that's .co/WIMWR. That's WIMWR for Whiskey in My Wedding Ring. Patrons get first access to this one too, and got free shipping alongside it. The next barrel pick that's scheduled is a toasted oat whiskey from Spirits of French Lick, which should be available in about February and will also go through the same store. Also have a few picks rolling around right now that might pop up in the next few months. Best way to get first access, first knowledge of these things, special benefits, and codes for these bottles is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. You can support for as little as $1 a month, with tiers at $5, $15, and $25. The $15 and $25 tiers also come with the opportunity to not only get samples from me, but the $25 tier lets you join me for barrel picks, whether they're in person or virtual. And with a lot of barrel picks hopefully coming down the line, this is the best time to sign up. There are just a few spots left at those top tiers, so if you're interested, don't miss out. Sign up now. Finally, I am thrilled to welcome Black Button Distilling out of Rochester, New York as my newest sponsor. They've just opened a beautiful new facility, and I got to visit, tour around, and do an on-site episode that'll come out later this month. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for supporting. Sign up on Patreon and rate and review wherever you can. Hey, folks. Welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to bring on someone I met very recently, but have been reading for many years and following their work, Miss Maggie Kimberl.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Happy to. I was, yes, purely by chance. We met at the KBF, really at the Broken Barrel event around the KBF, and then ran into each other after.
I almost didn't go to that because it was so late at night and I was feeling very elderly that night. And I was like, why is it so late and so dark?
I was too. And when I saw it was like, I was torn because there were like 15, 20 people. And then I knew some people had gone to a Michter's event that night, I believe.
And there were some dinners at some of the distilleries. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. But I drove all the way back in from the Louisville area for this party that's in Bardstown that started at like, what was it, 8 o'clock or something? And I was like, this is too late.
Yeah. I felt it too. I'd flown into and driven up from Nashville the day before, and was also staying in the Louisville area across the river. Made the mistake of staying in Indiana. It's nothing against Indiana. It was just a much longer drive. So
that's the nation's repository of orange barrels.
So like I said, I really am happy to have you on. I've been thinking about reaching out for a long time because, as I read Whiskey Magazine, American Whiskey Magazine, in addition to other publications of which you're a part, and this kind of just fell into our lap. So with that, as promised, I'll jump in right away. You're going to skip the get to know you questions. You'll find out, I think, a lot about Maggie while we're doing this interview, but of course there will be the research notes in the show notes for this episode if you're interested in learning more about how she got into whiskey writing and into the industry. So
the main thing you need to know is I have no filter and I just keep talking.
Well, the filter part of this, I can attest to you from some of the Whiskey Cast happy hours.
Oh yeah, no, I made Mark make a really funny face one time. And oh gosh, and I can't even remember what I said. It was really, really funny and kind of a little raunchy, a little NSFW.
I'm not sure if I have that in there. It's possible I have these in my question because I definitely have some from that night. So with that, we'll jump right in. So first question. You've been writing for various publications, and we'll get to the list of those later on, but for various publications for about 7-8 years now. And over that time, a lot has changed, not only on the whiskey production side, but also on the media side.
Mm-hmm.
And Now, being myself on this kind of quote unquote influencer, although I don't always agree with that term, the influencer side with more people on Instagram, Facebook, having their own websites and podcasts and all of that. From your perspective as someone who's been writing for both sites and whiskey magazines, how has this rise of influencer culture affected anything from readership to the stories being run?
So the main thing is, and it all kind of comes back to this, the ad revenue base is kind of cannibalizing itself. And the main way that you see that play out is, it's really hard for publications to pay writers well, because they're just not getting the ad revenue. When it back in the days when it was like basically three magazines that were dedicated to the spirit of whiskey, and Whiskey Cast, and that was, Whiskey Cast was the podcast, and then there were the three magazines. There was a lot more ad revenue to go around to pay people like me to do what we do. With the rise of blogs and podcasts and things like that, we get a lot more voices, we get a lot more diverse voices, which is great. But what it ends up happening is that people are finding there's a lot less meat on the bone, so to speak. And so, like I have a lot of publication. One of my favorite things that keeps happening to me repeatedly is people are like, "Oh, hey, we think you're going to be perfect for us. We just slashed our budget, but we think you're going to be perfect." And I'm like, thanks so much for thinking of me after you just slashed your budget. But I understand why the problem's taking place, right? I mean, we do have more distilleries now, significantly. When I started doing this, there were like 70 distilleries in the entire United States, and now there are 3,400 locations with DSPs. That's not like individual distilleries. Some of these are like tasting rooms and things like that. But still, I mean, that's a huge shift, right? So there are more brands, there are more distilleries, but that doesn't necessarily translate into more ad revenue, because a lot of these places are teeny tiny. Like there are a lot of places making a barrel a week, or 10 barrels a month or something like that. And they don't have money to support the publications that are getting their information out there. And so, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what media does, what media can do, who does what's an appropriate ask for different people, different types of publications and things like that. We kind of all get lumped in a lot. I get a lot of pitches for tequila, rosé, restaurants in Jersey Shore, and I'm just like, why are you bringing me this? Well, you wrote about whiskey the other day. I'm like, okay, that doesn't mean that I cover restaurants in New Jersey. Do they even have whiskey on the menu? Probably not. So it's really interesting, with the changes in the media. You also have to have PR people who really understand that ecosystem. There are a lot of people who get it really wrong in the PR space, but then there are a lot of people who have been doing PR in this industry throughout this kind of shift, and they understand, like, these are the people we go to for this, these are the people we go to for this. And like, we they're really careful about making sure that they're sending things to the right people. So that's a lot of information, a lot of different sides, but it all kind of comes back to the fact that the advertising landscape is kind of cannibalizing itself right now. And so it's really difficult. Like when I walked onto the scene about 10 years ago, I wasn't making very much. My first job, I was making $3 an article, as a local beat writer, which is embarrassing to say now. But what's more embarrassing is that, like, I don't make a whole lot more than that now. I mean, because back then there was ad revenue to support a lot of writers covering a lot of different things, and we've seen this kind of shift, not just in the whiskey space, but in all the whole media landscape. Is, like, newsrooms are paring down, newspapers are paring down. There's a lot of like conglomeration and buying up newsrooms, and kind of trying to have like one person run 10 newspapers and things like that. And it's really changing the landscape in a lot of ways.
But it sounds like a mix between, I guess, two extremes. One being the pole of it's democratized whiskey information in a certain
Yeah.
way because
Yeah.
there are
A
so
lot
many
more
sources and
voices.
exactly a lot of voices, a lot of diverse voices, as you pointed out. Also, just so many more places to talk about and stories to talk about.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, on in a different pole is this just flood in the content space
Yeah.
of so many voices. And I mean, I've spoken before, I don't have a video component of the podcast or video content because there's just no time for it. I mean,
Yeah.
even if I wanted to invest in it from my own perspective, if you look at kind of whiskey tube from 6 to midnight every night of the week, there's at least one major player in every hour. And it's just too much. So
Yeah.
it's not worth it. I'd rather just be the person you listen to on the commute and where hopefully you're not watching on the commute. But
Eyes on the road, people. Eyes on the road.
yes.
No, I mean, like I was on the highway the other day and drove past several people who were looking down into their laps while they were driving, and like that's the unfortunate reality that we live in now. But yeah, if you're listening to this in your car, please put your phone down and pay attention. We want you to live to chase that next bottle.
Yes, and the speed limits are just a little bit higher down where you live than they are up here. So, which I love while I'm driving there, believe me.
Oh yeah, it's a fun place to drive, especially if you get back in some of them hollers out in eastern Kentucky. Let her rip. Yeah, it's a lot of fun back there.
And my first trip there, just side note, was in May of last year. And then I went back in August of that year. And May was basically in and out of Lexington the whole time. August,
Okay.
I just did 6 days, packed everything I could. 2 days out in Louisville, 2 days out of Bardstown, 2 days out of Nashville, and just packed it with distilleries and producers. And I remember realizing on my last day when I was getting ready to go to the airport in Nashville that I haven't seen one highway cop this entire trip. And
They're there.
I mentioned it to one of my friends who lives in Western Kentucky, and um, he's kind of gave the whole like, yeah, we kind of take care of our own thing down there. But
So yeah, there is an element of that. However, I will say in Tennessee, state troopers do not mess around. You do not speed in Tennessee. You do not try to argue with them if they pull you over. They are serious about their jobs. In Kentucky, we have a lot of undercover. So that, especially, all the states where the major interstates go through, 65, 75, those are all big like drug trafficking routes. So that's mostly kind of I think what they're looking for, but they will absolutely pull you over and they will absolutely ruin your day.
fair enough. So this next thing I wanted to talk about came out of the first Whiskey Cast happy hour that I listened to. This was back in August of 2021. So this was the one you did with obviously Mark, Peggy No Stevens, and Heather Wibbles.
Mm-hmm.
So just about 2 years ago, a little over. As someone whose job it is to talk to these distilleries and producers and people in the industry and to taste and evaluate, especially between magazines and competitions, I'm curious to hear what your COVID experience was like.
So that's actually a really great question. One of the jobs that I have is I am the co-chair of World Whiskeys North America. So it's actually really important for me to not catch COVID. I don't know if I caught COVID. I suspect maybe I did in 2020 because I lost my sense of smell and taste for a short period of time. And I started to get really nervous that I was not going to be able to judge that year because we did all of our judging remotely. And I was able to retrain my senses to come back. So I don't know if it was an allergy thing. It could have been an allergy thing because it was very temporary and I didn't have any other symptoms. And maybe I was just like more aware of it because I was freaked out about catching COVID. But I have this nice little at-home COVID test that I keep next to my desk. It's a tiny bottle of Jack Daniels. And every once in a while, I just open it up and go, banana taffy. I don't have COVID. And then I put it back and it stays right there. So I still mask in planes and in airports when I'm traveling. Pretty much before I walk into the airport, I put that mask on. It stays on pretty much the whole time until I get to my destination. I'm not masking everywhere I go anymore. I do, the COVID shots seem to work really well for me. I mean, to the point that my husband has had COVID like 3 times, and I sleep in the bed with him and I don't get it. So, something is working for me. Something is keeping me from getting COVID so far, thank goodness. But yeah, it's a big concern to worry about losing your sense of taste and smell when you literally taste and smell things for a living. I know a few people in the industry who have gotten COVID who have been like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm going to lose my job because I can't taste or smell anything. And so, there are some folks that I've talked to who have had to go through really rigorous training regimens to regain that sense of smell and taste. So it's really important for me to not have to go through that. I'm very cognizant of it. And so that was one of the reasons why I went and got my COVID booster today, because, we're going to all be together. I tried to get it before I went to Las Vegas. I judged the Las Vegas Global Spirits competition a couple of weeks ago, and I tried to get it before I went to that. And I showed up at Walgreens and the whole like metal shade thing was down, and it was like 2:30 in the afternoon. I was like, they're not at lunch. Where are they? And I found like somebody stocking shelves, and I was like, when's the pharmacist going to get back? And she's like, oh, we don't have a pharmacist right now. We haven't opened our pharmacy in days. And I was like, but I have an appointment. How are they taking appointments if I can't, like, nobody's there? And then I reached out to Walgreens and they were like, oh, ask the pharmacist. And I was like, I just told you the pharmacist isn't there. But yeah, it's something that I'm very cognizant of, and trying to take a lot of precautions. And, the vaccines seem to be doing their job. But when I travel, I'm going to wear a mask on a plane forever. I mean, that was an early decision where I was like, oh, hey, I used to get sick. I travel a lot. In 2019, I was on the road 1 week out of every month. I got sick every single time. Just because, we all know now air quality in planes is very poor. Air quality a lot of places is very poor, but especially when you cram like several hundred people in this tiny metal tube, there's not a lot of fresh air going on in there. So I made the decision early. I was like, oh, hey, like put this like cloth thing on my face and I don't get sick all the time. I'm in.
There's I don't have a formal question about this particular article, but it was co-written by you, and it was about Elizabeth McCall's career at Brown-Forman and Woodford Reserve. And part of the article did tend to, not specifically to COVID, but it was about just keeping yourself in almost an athletic mindset. Like athletes are always ready to go, and they're always prepared to perform.
Yeah.
And if you want to do that from this perspective, you need to take every precaution
take care
possible.
of it. Absolutely. And that's another thing that I've spoken to Ashley Barnes in particular about, because, even before COVID, whiskey tasters have taken great strides to take care of their palates. And she said a lot of things that I didn't even think of. Like I always knew things early on. I figured out like you don't want to eat pineapple, and then it turned out I was allergic to pineapple anyway. So that
good reason for you not to eat it.
Okay. Right. But like the enzymes in pineapple and mangoes, they have like very aggressive enzymes, and it can mess with your ability. It like, I don't know if you've ever like cut a bunch of mangoes and then your hands feel really soft after, because it's basically kind of like dissolving that dead layer of skin on your hands. That's the kind of thing that you want to avoid in your palate before you're going to start tasting whiskey. But Ashley Barnes took it even further than that, saying, like I wait for my tea to cool down before I take that first sip, because you don't want to burn the inside of your mouth, because also that would give you some issues. So, there are a lot of things that I've picked up along the way from talking to people who have been professional whiskey tasters for a really long time. These are all things that we have to think about, that the average person doesn't, like everybody else is like, ooh, steaming hot pizza. and we can't do that. We don't have that luxury. We can't burn the roof of our mouth with that greasy pepperoni.
I feel you. I don't take it quite as seriously as I know some of the professional tasters do, just because I mean I'm smaller audience, less pressure on me. But
Right.
no, I do try to do the main things of not a ton of garlic. That's probably the hardest one for me because I just love garlic and cooking with it.
Oh, garlic's awesome.
Um,
But you save that for after.
Yeah.
Go get you some garlic cheesy bread.
Perfect. So I tried to do those things, or at least do whatever I can to cleanse my palate before I taste things, in between tastings. I found that just salt, period, has been great as a palate cleanser. Works really, really well with peated things. It scientifically it binds to the phenols, the creosotes, and literally dissolves them and neutralizes them. So you could have something peated, have salt, particularly like large granule, and just wipes it out. And you can.
That's really interesting, because one of the things that we do to prepare glassware, if you haven't used it in a while, is to rub the inside of it with kosher salt, because that will take away any sort of lingering smells that might be in there. I bought the wrong dish detergent one time, and it left a very strong scent on all the dishes, and that was like, I'm a super taster, and so like everything I ate tasted like dish soap, everything I drank tasted like dish soap, and I was like, I cannot wait. Of course I didn't throw it away because like the stuff's expensive, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, I cannot wait until we're done with this box of dish soap. This is terrible. So it's really interesting, like the things, there was one time I realized that cleaning the Glencairns with your gross dish sponge, not a good idea, because then the insides or then all the whiskey tastes like moldy dish sponge.
Do it. I resisted using the dishwasher on them at first.
I have so many now. I'm just like, if they break, they break.
That's basically it. If they break, they break. I know anything that's not etched in is going to get eroded over time.
Yeah.
I get it, but there's so many. It's just, it's what it is, but it's so much easier.
Totally.
But speaking of Ashley Barnes, this is a great segue actually. So you wrote another, what I thought was excellent article in 2021 for Whiskey Magazine. It was titled "A Natural Nose for Whiskey." And for those who are listening and want to understand why, in general, women have a better olfactory senses, I found it a really easy to understand guide. It drew on both empirical experiment. Sorry.
Here, let me pull down my charts here.
Yeah.
I keep these right by my desk.
Yeah, it was empirical, but also drew on scientific research. And it was very easy to understand. And so
this right here is one of the studies that I quoted. And because I don't have academic access, I actually just reached out. I learned a long time ago, you can actually just email people who write these studies and be like, hey, can you send me a copy of this? And they'll do it.
Oh, yeah. I'm doing some research projects right now, or planning for some research projects. And despite going to 2 different universities for 2 different degrees, I no longer have access as an alumnus. So I've got to get some of these articles anyway. And that's how I'm going to get them. I did read that article, by the way. It was because I'm a nerd. I started out in biochem way before I got into any of this. So I'm interested in all this. But in your article, in referencing women such as Ashley Barnes, Peggy Noe Stevens, you pointed out that it's not just the science. It's also, I'm quoting, it's also the passion, dedication, experience, intelligence, and skill that transformed inherent ability into a keenly honed tool and propelled them to the highest level of the industry, unquote. And as someone who has joined them both as a super taster and as a functional taster, I should say, so inherent ability and built skill ability, this recognition of women having just better olfactory senses in general is becoming more well known and also more respected, I think, which is a great thing. Now, flipping that on its head, does that knowledge then place an undue burden on women who are blenders, tasters, judges, and reviewers?
No, not at all. So I'm going to clarify a couple of points to get to the answer. So the first thing is, it's not just that women tend to have larger olfactory bulbs as a rule. That doesn't mean that every woman has larger olfactory bulbs than every man. It's a spectrum. Nature does not do black and white, right?
Sure.
Everything is on a spectrum. And so generally speaking, women have larger olfactory bulbs, which are like right back here, and it's where the nerve endings from your nasal cavity end. And the reason why women have these is not what people think. People think, oh, yeah, so you can smell if the food's bad so you don't kill your baby or whatever. And that's not it at all. What it actually is you have to be able to smell your partner's pheromones to be able to determine whether they have a different subtype of immune system
Yeah.
than you do. Because if you have offspring that has genes from two different subtypes of immune systems, they're more likely to be successful. Not as in like your kids are going to turn into a doctor, but as in like they're going to live past, infancy.
Right.
And so that is one piece of it. But it's not an all or nothing kind of a thing, right? Everybody, like people from all over the spectrum, there are people all over the spectrum on everywhere. The other piece of that is women tend to have faster brain to palate recall. So we are faster and more accurate in accessing the sensory memories of the foods that we've had. So, when we teach people about the bourbon tasting technique, the first thing we say is, there are no wrong answers. This is all based on your life experience, the things you've eaten. And so somebody growing up in the deep South is going to have different sensory memories than somebody growing up in the Midwest or, the Southwest or wherever. Somebody in the United States is going to have very different sensory memories than like anybody else in the world, really. But women tend to be tend more toward being able to access more accurate descriptors in a quicker manner. And so just because, but I always tell people, just because you have could potentially have these natural abilities doesn't mean that somebody who maybe doesn't have these potential abilities can't learn it. So it's really just a matter of, and I'm going to pull down another piece of information here. So basically, oh, this isn't even the best one. Okay. I wish I had another one. So in a lot of, this is a flavor wheel. This is mostly having to do with wood. This is from ISC. And so in a lot of flavor wheels, it'll start off, there'll be like a little middle where it'll be like general stuff like nuts, spices, whatever. And then you get to the more specific on the outside. And what I tell people is if you can train yourself to get to that general, like nutty, spicy, then you can say, okay, it's spicy. Well, okay, what kind of spice? Does it remind me of an apple pie? Does it remind me of a pumpkin spice latte because it's pumpkin spice latte season? And you can go from the general to the more specific. And that's really the whole goal, is to be able to get yourself to identify that inner circle, the really general stuff. And if you can do that and you get really good at it, you can start to kind of push your way out a little bit. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but it is something that is trainable. You don't have to be a super taster to be able to train that. You don't have to have the fastest brain to palate recall. Nobody's going to time you when you're sitting at home drinking your whiskey trying to take notes, right? You can take as much time as you need. You can sit there and stare at your damn flavor wheel as long as you want and say, okay, well, I think it's maybe coffee, but is it more cafe au lait? Is it more espresso? Is it more bitter? Is it sweeter? And then try to branch out from there.
And on one hand, I love that. I tend to tell people to do the same thing. My example is usually around sugar. Like if something smells sweet or tastes sweet, is it sugar? Is it honey? Is it syrup? Then what kind of sugar? What kind of honey? Molasses, yeah. And the more you break it down, the more you get into the specifics of the flavors and you start identifying them more and more often. That's, as you were talking about, training in the first place, and also retraining if you have COVID or something else happens. it helps to really think about it, take the deep breath, and start going down, down,
And you have
down
to
into the tree.
start with what you know, right?
Hmm.
So, like, everybody knows what banana Laffy Taffy tastes like. I mean, most people probably do in the United States anyway. But like, if you get down your little bottle of Jack Daniel's, the yeast that they use has a very distinct Laffy Taffy smell to it. And so, like, if you can start by identifying that and saying, oh, okay, I see, I can pick that out. Then you can kind of move on to other things. And if you're training or retraining, if you start with things that you're already familiar with, it's a lot easier to reinforce that connection in your brain.
When I need to reset, my go to is Elijah Craig, just small batch,
Yeah.
94 proof. It's usually what I think of, maybe too generalized, but I think it was like, if I have to tell someone this is what bourbon tastes like from Kentucky,
Hmm.
that's usually where I go to. But because I've tasted it so much, yeah, that becomes what Jack Daniels is to you. Is just I can smell it, I can taste it, and I know, okay, my palate's working.
It's your
'Cause there,
reset button.
yeah, because there are the times where you taste it and you think you're fine, you're not sick as far as you know, but you just start tasting something, you're like, something's off here. Like either it's the whiskey or it's me, and I need to make sure.
And there's also an ephemeral quality to tasting whiskey, right? This is something that my friend Michael Veach has written about and talks about a lot is, are you in a good mood? Did you get a raise that day? Did you get a new job that day? Are you celebrating? Did somebody die? Are you in mourning? Did your team lose? Did your team win? It's, there are all these things that we do that incorporate this ritual of drinking, and they can all have an impact on your perception. So if you try something and it's the best thing you've ever had, it might kind of be at least a little bit because you're having a really great day. If you try something and it's like the worst thing you've ever had, um, maybe before you blame the whiskey,
Mm-hmm.
take a look at what's going on around you, and is it bad? Are you having a bad day, or are you just looking for a scapegoat? Because that could be what it is.
I know that particularly in like a magazine setting or media setting, you have a strict limit of how many words or characters you can use to describe something. You got this much space, that's it. And so that's when we start getting terms like petrichor, because it's one word, nine characters, instead of saying the smell of earth after rain. You know,
Mm.
marzipan.
I've never used that one. Can I use that one sometime?
That's from the Brits. You can steal that as much as you want. Um, that became popular in Whiskey Advocate for a while when they were bringing more Isla whiskey back,
Okay,
because it was all earthy and peaty and stuff.
sure,
So yeah, so petrichor, nine characters instead of multiple words.
sure.
People go after Fred Minnick for marzipan, which is almond paste or candied almonds
Yeah.
and things. So it's condensing words into things, and that can also include sometimes particular scent memories. So a particular dessert or a candy
Hmm.
that you were familiar with as a kid.
Hmm.
Now, some of the ones that I've seen, I've never heard of in my life. So I'm curious, from your experience, I was going to ask what are your least and most favorite, but let's just say, what are kind of the weirder notes that you've seen people use that you just look at and
I'll
say,
tell you one that I used that I felt like a total freak show for saying it.
"Hmm,
Um, this was actually this was when I was like kind of first getting started. I was maybe 2 or 3 years into writing. And I went to this event, and I was just getting to know Michael Veach. So I was sitting with him. I was like, "Oh, I'm so cool. I'm sitting with Michael Veach." And everybody's we're all trying this really amazing whiskey, and everybody's going around and talking, giving their tasting notes and everything. And he leans over, he goes, "Well, what do you get in this?" And I was like, "Rubber bands." And he was like, "Well, it I don't know what rubber bands taste like, but if you say you get rubber bands, I'm not going to tell you it's wrong." He always says, like, if you say you get black olives in this, I'm going to say you have a really weird palate, but that's not wrong because that's what you get. And so, like, I don't really bust a lot of chops. for stuff like that. I think that people making fun of marzipan, like, okay, so your mom didn't cook you cookies for the holidays? How sad for you.
Yeah,
Like,
that one was a little overblown for a while for sure.
right.
That people
I
were
mean,
more sore about the
I don't know
McKenna
that I
being allocated. So
necessarily knew to call it marzipan. I didn't know that term, but like that flavor, I absolutely know what it is. That's the icing that you put on holiday cookies. You make it with almond extract.
Mhm.
And so, I don't think that's an especially weird thing to get. I think that's actually something that a lot of people get. And, whatever, and it all comes back to like whatever your experiences are, whatever you ate at home, whatever you all cooked regularly, those are the things that you're going to gravitate toward over and over and over again.
uh, now that we're talking a little bit more about the writing and the content of it, you are the content editor for American Whiskey Magazine,
Correct.
also a contributor for Whiskey Magazine,
Hmm.
and I have not had an editor on here before. I had a couple of authors, but not any editors. So I did want to ask, as a content editor, how much control and discretion do you have over anything from the stories that are being run to the brands and categories that get spotlighted in the tasting notes?
So the tasting notes, I handle that all myself. So all this that you see behind me is the coming whiskey tastings. I actually have tastings scheduled out to 2025 right now. That is why
Okay,
you can't see my desk. And then there's a whole box over here that I pulled this curtain over because I'm running out of room. And then I have nowhere to put this guy. So I'm starting to really run out of room. And I just poured samples for the next issue. So I'm in this like constant like panic cycle with the samples because I have a whole line of boxes, and what I do is I wait until I can't get in and out of my office anymore, and then I open all the boxes and I put them in the log for which issue they're going to go into, and everything goes in the order that I receive it. And then, when I pour samples, I pull them from the shelf and then I rearrange everything and try to make room for everything. And then I realize I still don't have enough room for everything. So it's like this ongoing panic cycle. But I will pretty much, if somebody wants to send me something, I say send it. Like I tell people like, hey, it's not going to publish for, over a year. So if it's something that's like really special or unique or one off, and it doesn't make sense to really have that come out in a year and a half, then don't send it. But if you want to, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you no. I'll sometimes have people want to send me their flavored stuff, and so I'll say, hey, my tasters are Peggy No Stevens and Susan Riegler, are you comfortable with that? And a lot of times people say, you know what, no, I'm not, and they'll not send it. But sometimes people are like, absolutely, and they send it anyway. So that I don't do a lot of gatekeeping is kind of what I'm getting at. I'm just very honest about the process. And I'm like, if you're comfortable with this process, please send me whatever you would like to have sampled. Now, there have been some things that I've been like, I'm not doing that to anybody. There was a whiskey that had venison in it, and then there was a whiskey that had blue crabs in it, and I was like, both from the same distillery, and I was like,
I remember them well.
I don't think so. Nope, nope. But what I ended up, this was from Tamworth Distillery in New Hampshire, and what I ended up learning from that is I finally said to their PR gal, who I've known for years, I was like, honey, do they have any whiskey flavored whiskey? And she said, oh yeah, here. And she sent me Chakura Rye. And that has turned out to be one of my favorite rye whiskeys that I have ever tried. So it was really funny because it started off, I was like, what are these crazy people doing, putting meat in their whiskey? Is that even a thing? And then it turns out they make this amazing rye whiskey. So, you know, it's sometimes you have to kind of dig a little deeper
Mhm.
to get to the real story. And that's what I really enjoy doing. So yeah, that's pretty much the whole level of gatekeeping that I do as far as keeping, as far as whether I will accept a sample for the magazine or not. I'm like, if you're comfortable with these parameters that I've laid out, go ahead and send it.
And I should say that, we hear often about old distilling traditions where, of course, they started distilling on a farm because the grain was going to go bad. I haven't heard the same thing about the venison or the crabs going bad, but hey, it's possible. I don't know. I've had some crabs that have been out for 2 hours. Probably don't want to eat those. So why not distill
Yeah,
it?
I mean, well, so the whole thing with the blue crabs is they were an invasive species, and they were like, "What do we do with all these crabs?" And
Yeah, that
I
was
was
a
like,
special
"Okay, but
project. Yeah.
whiskey? No, I don't think we need to do whiskey with that. Maybe some crab spread or something. I don't know. Maybe they tasted funky. I don't know, but I
Uh,
didn't try it. I didn't want to try it. It did not appeal to me."
there are some things that I just turn down. I don't want to taste that. I don't want to know
Yeah,
what that tastes like.
that is
Yeah.
well. And when they first pitched me the venison one, I was vegan, and I was like,
Yeah, that's
"No,
fair. Yeah.
mm-mm.
I I've been blinded with ramp vodka and wicked pickle whiskey and a couple of others that just that they're either gimmicks or shots or things. I was like, yeah, I'm good.
One
I,
of the things that I tasted recently was watermelon flavored whiskey, and it tasted
oh yeah,
exactly like watermelon Hubba Bubba. You remember Hubba Bubba?
oh yeah, oh yeah.
It
Now I
was
want to
like,
try it. You're the second
well,
person who's mentioned it to me. So
and I was like, I mean, if the goal here was to taste like my childhood gum, they checked that box. But it's not whiskey. I could not detect any flavor of whiskey in it. It was 100% watermelon Hubba Bubba.
this is fair. And I should also say, if unless my eyes deceive me, if you need more room on those shelves, I do see a couple of William Heaven Hills that are really attractive. But no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Uh,
I'll tell you what,
so
once I open them up and pour off a couple of samples, all they do is sit in my dining room until I freak out and start like I literally will take a box of whiskey to my kids' pediatrician office when I take them in for their yearly visits. I'm like, here you go. And then I have to like call and be like, hey, can I sneak this whiskey in for so they're like, okay, and then I walk in with a giant box.
I hate to do that. It's I have a background on because again it's there's no video, so I don't have a picture behind me. I want to get this a barrel wall eventually, so I have something real behind me. But yeah, my desk right now is just like it looks like yours. It's just covered in bottles and samples and papers of different descriptors, and it's quite out of hand. So I need to give some stuff away.
I have shelves on that wall, shelves on that wall, shelves over there, and then the open bottles are generally in my dining room and half covering my dining room table.
Same, honestly, same at the moment. It only gets cleaned off when we're playing a board game or something, and it has to be moved elsewhere, and then it goes right back.
My husband was playing a board game yesterday and was like, are these bottles in a specific?" And I was like, "Don't touch them." So he had to drag in some extra tables.
So this is all segueing quite well tonight. This might be the best flow that I've ever had in this. So on your second whiskey cast happy hour, which still is one of my favorite, if not my favorite of all time.
I feel like I
Uh,
cussed more on that one.
oh, you did definitely, but
Mm.
it was so worth it. Um, in Mark's intro for it going live, so not part of the live itself, but when he re-releases it, he was like, Mag used a couple words that couldn't say or didn't say or say, and I was expecting a few, and then I was like, ooh, this was fun.
Maggie has a potty mouth.
I loved it. Uh, so I mean, you covered a lot of topics that night. It was you and Clay Risen
Mhm.
with Mark, and this was in February of 22. And one of the things I wanted to pull out was that when finishing bottles, you said there's kind of a code of ethics in whiskey geekdom
Mhm.
about certain bottles in particular, and we all know which ones those are.
Mhm.
That requires you to destroy the bottle after you're done with it.
Mhm.
And this is purely a personal question because I wanted to ask, what I do is some occasionally I'll keep if it's like a really special bottle or if it's
Mhm.
a decanter that I really like. But I'm willing to destroy the bottles, but I usually strip the labels first.
Mm.
So I'll strip the labels and I don't know how it'll come across here, but because of the background. But I basically put them in my tasting journals.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Here, I will. do this for a second so you can actually see. So it just lines my tasting journals, and then it becomes a kind of repertory, a scrapbook of what I've tried over the years. Some labels are a lot easier to get off than others.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Beam ones. I take that back. Not all Jim Beam ones. Booker's labels are impossible.
Yeah. You need dynamite to get those. Yeah.
Michter's, same thing. Knob Creek, nice and easy. Barrel, nice and easy. But it obviously it's more economical in terms of space because you don't have all the bottles laying around. But in that sense, I don't know how many people are going through my recycling, but if anyone is going through my recycling to find bottles, it's just that extra step that they would have to take. They have to fake the label too.
Yeah.
And it's like, go ahead. Oh, and I keep the corks. So only the bottle itself goes out. So I'm like, go ahead and try. Prove it to me that you can do it.
Yeah. And so a lot of times, so because I'm in Kentucky, one of the things that we can do is there are folks who build things with bottles. So they do like soap dispensers or candles or lamps, things like that. And so there have been a couple of times when I've given a box of bottles to someone that I know is not going to refill them and try to sell them on the black market. That being said, I have not emptied a whiskey bottle in years, literally years. The closest I have gotten is maybe a little more than halfway done, because I just have so much, and it is rare for me to go back to the same bottle more than once. And if it's people coming over, that's usually when the most liquid is drained from the bottles. But even then, I have not completely finished a bottle of whiskey in years. So back when I was still finishing bottles occasionally, I was finding people who would take those bottles and repurpose them, because there are some beautiful, I mean, the artwork that goes into some of these bottles is absolutely gorgeous. And I know, like, there's part of me that's like, that's not the point, that's not supposed to be the part that matters, and all that kind of stuff. But I also appreciate the attention to detail that you get with some of the bottles. There are some absolutely gorgeous. One of the ones that I'm looking at up here is Coalition. He actually had those bottles created by somebody who does perfume bottles in France. So it's actually a really gorgeous bottle. And like the Old Fitz decanters that are coming out now, those are gorgeous. Sure. I wish that I could still get Old Fitz for $12.99. I'm always going to miss that. But, but the other thing that I do with my bottles is when I judge whiskey competitions and I end up with like 57, 3/4 full 50 mLs, I will oftentimes make an infinity bottle out of that. And so sometimes, like what I did one year was I put it all in a big decanter, and then I put it into like some little 200 mLs and labeled it. So then whenever anybody came over, I'm like, oh, here you go. Take this home. You'll never try anything like that again. So that's actually kind of a fun thing to do with your old bottles, is to kind of turn it into an infinity bottle, or, like make your own kind of blend in it and that kind of thing.
This month's Impact Spotlight is on Nichnine. Founded by Annabelle Thomas, Nichnine has a pioneering approach to spirit making, putting innovation and sustainability at the forefront. Through Nichnine, Annabelle seeks to change the way the world thinks about whiskey from Scotland, and to create a whiskey which could exist in harmony with our planet and its inhabitants. Nichnine has created a spirit with exceptional body and sweetness, showcasing their smooth and elegant house style. This is achieved through a combination of sourcing high-quality organic Scottish barley, gentle fermentation and distillation processes, and maturation in a combination of 3 carefully selected cask types: ex-American whiskey casks, STR, shaved, toasted, and recharred casks that held red wine, and a small amount of Oloroso sherry casks. The result is flavors of lemon sherbet, juicy stone fruits, and spiced rye bread. This whiskey is set to disrupt the industry through Nichnine's commitment to sustainability and creative approach to distilling. With an uncompromising focus, the small team of eco-conscious drinks fanatics also dedicate 10% of their spirit production to trialing different yeasts not commonly found in whiskey distilling, all on their journey to seek out and find new flavors in their whiskey making. If you're a longtime listener, you know how interested I am in whiskeys and distilleries like this, and how excited I am that Impex is now bringing it stateside. Annabelle will be visiting Chicago for Whiskey and Barrel Night on October 25th, and will be hosting special masterclasses featuring the key components of Nichnine, along with their core organic single malts. These tastings will also include a sneak peek of Quiet Rebel's Gordon. Only 630 bottles of the special one-time only release will be coming to the States, so it's a release and an event you won't want to miss. Nichnine Organic Single Malt is currently on its way to specialty retailers across the U.S. For more information and questions on where to buy, please contact the Impex Beverages office at office@impexbev.com and follow on social media to never miss a release. The Whiskey Ring podcast is proudly sponsored by Impex Beverages. I've done that twice now, one with different types of ryes. But my favorite one was at a certain point I had every Elijah Craig barrel proof, including the 12 original batches, the pre-release gift shop one that I found by accident, really. That was from 2011, 2012, all the way through A122. And I decided to put an ounce of everything into an infinity decanter.
Interesting.
So every Elijah Craig batch from the very first one, Elijah Craig barrel proof batch, I should say, from the very beginning to A122, I still have some of it. I just try a little bit every couple of months, and it's one of the best things I've ever had. So,
oh wow! See, now I'm sad because I gave away a whole bunch of my Elijah Craig barrel proof stuff because I had so many of them, and I was like, okay, this person likes Elijah Craig barrel proof. Here you go. Here are 7 bottles of different vintages.
Those old pirate bottles they're so good.
Yeah.
So switching gears totally on this one, but also came from this same episode when you, Mark, and Clay were talking about new brands, new-ish brands, such as Remus came up, Clyde Mays, where these brands are, or rather I should say, the central figure in these brands is highly problematic for one reason or another. And they've each got multiple reasons. Clay also mentioned, Elijah Craig and Evan Williams were both known slaveholders. In Mark's words, we've been naming bourbons after assholes for years.
Yes.
And anyone even remotely interested in whiskey history knows the link between not only slavery, but also things like Confederate ideology and like rebel yell going to rebel now.
Yeah.
So it's not the exception, it's more the rule, it seems. So
it does tend to be. Yeah.
So taking all of that into account as kind of one idea, which I know is a lot, but it as one idea, as a writer and as a journalist, what is your approach when you come across these stories in new brands or new things that you're exposed to?
Well, I'll tell you, with the Remus brand in particular, when the folks were first coming up with that, it was an independent brand, and then they ended up selling it to MGP. MGP they make amazing whiskey. I'm going to start by saying that, but they are just horrendous at branding. And so when the original folks were coming up with the Remus brand, I met one of them somewhere, or I was talking to him on Twitter or something like that, and they're like, oh, we're going to name a whiskey after George Remus. And I was like, he murdered his wife, right? And they're like, oh, that'll never come up. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And so I actually asked the folks at MGP one time, because they were the story that you get when people talk about George Remus is the bitch had it coming story. And like that's always been problematic to me, right?
Just a little,
and
yeah.
But like a lot of guys don't think about things like that. A lot of guys don't worry about being murdered by their spouse, which is unfortunately something that women have to worry about. So, like I've heard this story repeated over and over and over again. So I knew the story very well because I'd heard it so many times, like, oh, he was the king of the bootleggers and blah, blah. And he was the first person to successfully plead temporary insanity and got off for killing his wife. And so I asked the folks at MGP one time, like, hey, like, do you really think it was a good idea to buy this brand that like basically glorifies a guy who murdered his wife? And they're like, oh, well, and they told the bitch had a coming story. And I was like, all right, then I'm not going to get invited back here, and I'm fine with that. So I tend to not be I'm not the type of person that sugarcoats things or tries to find common ground, and like there are some things like you just kind of shouldn't have common ground on. And what I would love to see the Remus brand do is to be like, hey, you know what, we fucked up, but now we have all this money, so why don't we give it to some women's charities? Let's do some domestic violence prevention or donate to a women's shelter or something like that. Like I don't know if I'll see that. I don't know if that I feel like there are a lot of people who feel like this is not my problem, and it's not their problem. The Rebel brand has been interesting. It's been interesting to watch that like kind of rebrand because we all know what it is. I would not be as taken aback if it had started as the Rebel brand, but knowing that it started as Rebel Yell and it was marketed toward Southern white people, we all hear that dog whistle loud and clear. And it's weird to me to see these large companies just be like, this is fine, but it's even weirder, like when you look at things like Elijah Craig and other folks like that, George Washington, like the Mount Vernon distillery. I love it. I go there all the time. One of the things that we know because he was such a meticulous record keeper is we know the names of the enslaved men who worked in his distillery, and I usually can rattle them off the top of my head, but it's been a long day and I just got my COVID booster. So I did write about them at one point in time because I actually got to go into the archives and like see some of these documents and things like that. But when you're looking at historical figures like that, like these are people who existed and facts that exist about them. And when you have something like the Elijah Craig brand or whatever else that's named for somebody, and these brands have been around for a long time, I understand that when these brands were first initially developed, people were not really necessarily thinking in terms of, well, does this person have a squeaky clean image? Because no, they did not. When it comes to the more modern brands like the Clyde Mays and the George Remus and things like that, we really should have known better on some of those. And I think that a lot of times I don't know, there's like kind of this mysticism around gangsters and it's so cool and, gangster movies and all this other stuff. And, we're past the point where we can give people a pass on things. And there are so many other things that you can name brands after. That's not to say that, there are some brands that are named after creeks and rivers and, geographical features. And, if you really dig down into anything, you can find some problematic history, right? But, something as explicit as George Remus, who shot his wife chased her down in a taxi and shot her in the middle of the street, maybe he does not need to be glorified.
I agree with totally. There's nothing to disagree with there, I would say. And unfortunately, jokingly came to my mind that, and we thought Slapdick was the worst branding in the last couple of years. That was his own personal, not only bullshit
and
story,
stuff
but
like
just
that. It's like,
thing.
I used to work at the liquor store, right? And this was when they were naming wines like bitch wine and what were some of the other ones? But it was just like, it was shock value, right?
Mhm.
But really, when it comes down to it, it's just stupid. It's not that offensive. Um, that it doesn't hurt anybody really. So it's just dumb, and it's pandering to a certain audience, and I get that kind of thing. It's that was never my thing. I was never like, oh, bitch wine, um although I did used to get Bitch magazine, which was awesome. I need to re-up my subscription to that.
But that was kind of that's different. That's not, I don't know, that I would definitely see as different because of both the staff writing and the audience intended for it.
Yes.
Like those matched in that case.
Yes,
So like,
exactly.
that was okay.
Exactly. That was more of a like taking back the word kind of a thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
And with a lot of things, people are like, well, what's the most shocking thing I can do? What's the most shocking thing I can do for attention? And as parents, we like to tell our kids, not all attention is good attention. Just remember that.
And just to close out this topic, I think, to your point, the modern brands in particular, there's even less, if there was any justification or excuse that you could make, there's even less so now that you could just do searches.
Yeah.
Not everything is in a hidden archive somewhere or in a seed bank. Like simple Google searches
Absolutely.
will tell you the stories.
And really, in the last 5 years, the amount of resources that have come online is astronomical, and there's no excuse. I remember, so I studied linguistic anthropology in college. I double majored English and philosophy. And one of the things that I remember learning that was so funny to me was that pharmaceutical companies actually employed linguists to research drug names to make sure it wasn't something that was offensive in another language. And obviously they're not still doing that because they have some really weird names coming on the market now. But, back then when people actually got paid for their expertise, which is also a dying art, there used to be somebody who could like look through all the different language databases and make sure that their drug name wasn't like fart in Chinese or whatever.
I can't think of the exact example, but there was a food item that I thought of. I think it was a soda brand, if I remember correctly, that it was from one of the major companies, and in Spanish it meant like disgusting. So, and it was again a common word. It wasn't some esoteric thing that nobody had used, or 15th century verb.
My
or something.
Kids would probably know. They're all about that hashtag meme life.
Oh God, I'm like right at the age edge where I'm also that life, but I miss the new ones. Like I don't go near TikTok. It's like I don't have the energy.
Oh yeah.
I'll stick Instagram.
I'm a no TikToker. We're a no TikTok family. TikTok skeeves me out.
It's too much. Anyway, on a lighter topic, so I want to switch over again to bourbon women. And I should say, before we get into this, it sounds like I'm switching around a lot. It's because there are a lot of facets, and I don't often get to talk to someone who is so multifaceted in terms of what they're interested in and what you've written and talked about. Thank you.
It's the ADHD.
Hey, if you got it, flaunt it. So and that's of course, no disrespect to other guests. It's more, if you're talking about to a distillery, you're going to talk about the things that happen at that distillery and their climate and all of that. So that's why it sounds like I'm bouncing around. Anyway, with Bourbon Women, at the time that you did your first Whiskey Cast happy hours, this was August of 21. I think had just been elected the president to take the position in that following January of 22.
No, I became president in 21.
It wasn't 21. Okay, so you were president at that time.
So I was president from January to January 21 to January 22.
Right. So at that time, there were around 12 chapters around the country. You were adding about 2 to 3 coming online each year. What does that count look like now?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I have not kept up with that information because it's such a rapidly evolving and fast growing group. that, once I stepped back and started going back into focusing on writing full time, I'm not able to keep up with that information. So I would be surprised if they were not up to, 15 or more branches at this point in time. It's a really just a phenomenal organization. The symposium conference that they have every August brings in women from all over the country and even a few international folks. And it's just absolutely amazing to see everybody coming together just for the love of brown water, right? And they have everybody has so much fun. It's a really great, it's a whole conference. So there's like field trips and there's classes and there's tastings and there's, like all kinds of stuff that people can do. And it's just a fun way to spend a weekend doing stuff, for yourself, which is hard as a woman because, we have kids and careers and all this other stuff. And we would oftentimes have a good number of guys who would come to the symposium, which, they were vastly outnumbered and they were very brave for being there. But they were having the time of their lives as well. I attended the Black Bourbon Society's conference about a month ago here in Louisville, the Bourbon and Boulet. And it was the same kind of thing. It was people from all over the country coming together and doing classes and distillery tours and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's always a lot of fun to see the different group, like how these groups bring different groups of people together over this shared love of this one thing that's so unique. I just really enjoy I really enjoy events like that and groups like that because it's bringing in different facets of humanity, really, for this thing that we should all be enjoying together.
And I wasn't sure at first. I later clarified it just in re-listening that I thought it may have been both the symposium, the bourbon women. I thought that they were exclusive to women. Now it's, of course, like you said, it's vastly majority women there, a couple of guys. But I mean, I gotta say, as a guy who's very into this and also is very into the idea of just more people being involved, that sounds like the perfect place to be. Now, I'm not advocating for, guys to just flood the place and, sweep the majority, but like for me, I would love to see next August, what am I doing when the symposium is happening? And see what does a conference look like or a meeting look like where it is mostly women leading it, organizing it, speaking, doing all these things. Because I'll be honest, most of my experiences have been led by men.
It is a totally different vibe. And, I told people all the time when I was in the presidency with Bourbon Women that, men are allowed to join. Men are definitely allowed to come to the events. You're going to be outnumbered, but it's a totally different vibe. It's very warm and welcoming. And that's not to say that, the majority male events are not warm and welcoming. It's just a different vibe, right? Like dudes tend to be very serious about whiskey, like to the point where sometimes I just gotta step back and tell them to have a nice day. But it's a totally different vibe when you look at some of these more diverse groups of whiskey enthusiasts. Kobe was another one. I went to their event, I guess last November. It was maybe a year ago. And it was like the energy was just different, Kobe is Kentucky's original black bourbon enthusiasts. And so, I mean, they had a live auction going on with an auctioneer. And so their whole thing is like raising money for charities. They do a lot of things like blessings in a backpack and things like that. Getting school supplies for kids and books and food and that sort of thing. And so, but they have so much fun doing it. It's, all these different groups putting on their big yearly events. I mean, they're all totally different vibes. And so it's definitely well worthwhile to experience these things. If you feel like, should I go to that? Like, yes, they're selling tickets. They want your money. Give them your money. Go have a good time. That's what they want, right?
Mhm.
But it's really it's been eye-opening experiencing bourbon from all these different vantage points. Because there for a while it kind of was feeling like oh, it's another bourbon festival, oh, it's another and it was kind of like copy paste repeat. And then these different groups started bringing all this diversity into it, and they all have totally different vibes now. So it's really interesting and a lot of fun.
I'll know what I'll be doing next August, to hopefully
There you
what I'll be doing
go.
next August. And I hear on Kobe too. That one was, I knew a couple of people who were coming down from the New York City, Jersey area, and were going. And I, someone did ask me, can you come down for this? And it was just because it was so close to the KBF that I had to
Yeah.
choose, because I also have a day job, so
Right.
I only have so many days off. And
Right.
so, in this case, it was the first time going to the KBF, and I wanted to make the most of it. And I hear you in that there's a certain point where you're like, okay, it's another festival. I've, for the most part, stopped going to festivals around here because it's the same brands and it's the same
Yeah.
people. And but this time at the KBF, I've definitely met a lot of new brands, but also met a lot of the people that I've been talking to that I'd never met in person. But they're always behind the handle or something,
That's one of
or
the great things about all these events. Like I built my presence on Twitter. And so getting out and finally starting to meet some of the people that I knew on Twitter was really fun because, like we had spent all this time like talking and then like here, oh, you're a real person, yay. But the nice thing about all the bourbon events is, like I travel a lot and I am never alone. I travel by myself and then I get there and I find like 20 people that I know while I'm in the lobby of the hotel checking in.
Mhm.
And I never have to dine alone. I never have to, walk to a venue alone. There's always that's one of the nice things about this community is because it is kind of okay, I'm gonna say this, and then I'm gonna okay, so it's like a big family, but not in the like toxic workplace. We are family here, but
Mhm.
like really and truly, these are the people that we spend the most time with. And, we're all trying to work together toward a common goal of, like making sure that people get accurate information and that they get the information that they're looking for. Because I feel like with the consumer education piece of it, that's one of the reasons why the whiskey boom is booming so vigorously right now,
Mhm.
because consumers want to know that information and brands are willing to give it to them. And I'm kind of the intermediary for that. So, we're all kind of working together for this common goal of getting people the information that they want. And so, like there are a lot of folks in the industry who have become amazing friends of mine. And I love being able to, no matter where I go, I'm gonna see somebody that I know.
I mean, it was lovely. I keep telling the story because I love it so much. It's I had been chasing Lisa Wicker for an interview for about a year. So just after she left Widow Jane and all the way through. And for one reason or another, just things just kept getting moved. I couldn't make it. She couldn't make it. And eventually I reached out to her saying I was going to be down for the KBF and, you know, could she meet up? At that point, I wasn't even thinking interview. I was just like, let me just grab a drink with this woman who's done so many things. I just want to hear her talk. And instead, we ended up talking for, she said, oh, yeah, come here. I'll host you at my house for an interview. I got maybe an hour and 10 of podcast content. We spoke for 3 hours plus total.
Wow.
I missed a couple of events at the KBF and I was fine missing them because I was like, this
Yeah,
is the better place to be because,
absolutely.
and afterwards, she, I mean, where she lives, but it's Bardstown. It's not a huge town. So
Right.
she said, yeah, just she was started to point me in the direction of the festival. And she's like, "No, I'll just walk you over there." So it was great. And even then, since then, I've been able to, text her a question or ask her. I'm waiting for her announcement on her new, where she's going now, or where she is working now. Hasn't been made public yet, but I want to tell people because it's exciting.
Yep.
I figure as well. So
yep.
Yep. So I'm excited for that to come out. But I agree. It's just so nice to see these people, that not only people, let's say from the influencer side, who I only knew their first names, some of them, but I knew their handles and I could pick them out. But also people like Lisa, who maybe it's different being from Kentucky or being from the area, but I'm not going to run into these people.
Yeah.
I'm not going to just be at a distillery and have the master distiller walk out in the same way. I could maybe at some of the ones in New York, but it's different.
Yeah.
These people have these legendary statuses,
Well, and the thing that I like to remind people of is this is still a blue collar job, right? So I ran into somebody that I knew in the post office years ago, and it was right after Jim Rutledge had left Four Roses. And this person I was talking to was like, "Oh, I don't know why he wants to build a distillery. He's got millions and why is he crowdfunding? He's got millions." And I was like, "How much money do you think master distillers make?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, he's a millionaire." I was like, "He doesn't own the company. Like, he just worked there." So there's some misconception of, what these people are and what they do, which I think kind of feeds into that, like, oh, they're so like, upper tier or whatever. This is the most down to earth group of people you could ever talk to. I talked to Fred No and Freddie No at the Bourbon Festival. And this was in the video that we just published on Whiskey Magazine's YouTube page yesterday. Fred No, I asked Fred No what his favorite thing about the festival was, and he was like, "Well, I don't have to go very far. It's right across the street." Oh, but stuff like that. I mean, these are all just like really super down to earth people, who are just pleasantly surprised that anybody has interest in what they do. So I think it's a really fun thing to be enthusiastic about, because like it's not like being a Star Trek nerd where the only time that you can meet Jonathan Frakes is if you go to the Comic-Con and stand in line for 3 hours. There's still a lot of standing in line to meet these folks at like the Bourbon Festival and stuff, but like if you go to the distillery, like if you go out to Wild Turkey and you walk into the gift shop, there's like a 90% chance that Jimmy Russell's going to be sitting on his little stool in the corner of the gift shop, and he's going to love it if you come take pictures with him and ask him to sign things.
Especially if it's Sunday after church. That seems to be like the best spotting time for him.
Yes. And he's such a sweet man. Oh my gosh.
I've missed him both times, but granted, it was off times. I got to see Bo both times, but I mean, at the fest, just running into, I said hi to Fred No. I missed Freddie, but I saw Fred, and I was like, "Oh my god! Like, I have to take a picture with this guy and introduce myself."
When else are you going to get an opportunity, right?
And then I 2 minutes later ran into Brent Elliott, and I swear to God, my first thought when I ran into him was, "Oh my god, he's tall." And because I realized that of all the times I had seen him or been on a Zoom call or something, he's always sitting down.
Yep. He's always behind his desk.
Right. And like, I'm normal height. I'm 5'10", but I was like, "Oh, okay. That's different." And
and Jim Rutledge is also really tall. I think they had a height requirement for the Four Roses master distiller job.
Seemingly, yeah. Al Young wasn't a shorty either. He wasn't a distiller.
No, yeah, he was also tall. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're right. When else are you going to do it? And it's so much fun. And now hopefully I'll get to interview these guys at some point. I say guys because that's just the group that I happen to meet, but no, that's not true. There were several women there actually, now that I think about it. Elliot Peerless. There are a bunch that actually I'll have to reach out to and follow up with, but it was fun. Who else are you going to do that? So I want to take a little bit more time to talk about your writing. And on the, I don't know how to actually call this podcast, so I'm just going to say the Real Blank podcast. You described becoming a writer as kind of a personality flaw,
Yes.
with whiskey and writing coming together at the same time. And then
Yes.
you doubled down on that on a different episode with Thirsty Thursdays, saying that when you were in college, your professor said that you wouldn't make any money as a writer. Now,
Yes.
you said yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But in listening to it, I made sure to hear that the professor said you wouldn't make any money as a writer, but not that you couldn't write. So
yeah, and I don't know that I necessarily picked up on that distinction, because like I just want to be a writer and get paid to be a writer. That is what I wanted. There was a point in time, I don't know if you remember Samantha Brown. She had a show. She's had several shows on the Travel Channel over the years. And I remember like watching her and then watching Anthony Bourdain. And I was like, I just want to travel the world and then write about it. And so that was what I wanted more than anything. And I had this really funny realization a couple of years ago. I was like, oh, I accidentally became the thing that I wanted to be. Look at that. That's neat. So that was kind of cool to have that realization. But yes, when I was in college, I double majored English and philosophy. I really wanted to be a writer. And then, I had the professor who was like, there's no money in writing. It's going down the toilet, and that was really when digital publishing was first coming online, and there was no money to be made. I mean, people were making like $1 an article for a 2,500 word article, back in those days. And so it was a time when journalism was in decline, the digital landscape was really coming online, and blogging was really kind of becoming a thing, but not in a way like people like basically had their diary online. That's what blogging was back then. And I guess kind of what I do is kind of like my whiskey diary. um I mean, that I don't try to obscure my own feelings in this, and that's really apparent in a story that I did earlier this year about becoming a Tennessee squire. That was just totally hard on my sleeve, like trying to move through the grief of losing my grandfather. And so like I appreciate that my teacher put it into that perspective, because I would have been very I well, I still felt like I was doing something wrong. Like when I first was becoming a writer, and I was making like $3 an article, and I was working, I was working two jobs, and I was working like all the time constantly. What I would do back in those early days is I would do a preview review of local events. And so I would write the preview, and then I would go to the event, and then I would have to come home from the event at 10 o'clock at night, and post the recap to go live the next morning. And so it was a grueling pace that I was living at, and not making very much money doing it. But it gave me an opportunity to get out there and go to all the events, meet all the people. That's how I met Michael Veach. That's how I met Fred No. That's how I met Jim Rutledge. Like I met all these people doing that grueling pace for no money, basically. And it has grown to where I am getting paid a decent amount for a trade journalist. And you should really Google what a trade journalist makes sometime, because I'm a part-time trade journalist, and full-time trade journalists don't make very much money, and I'm part-time. So it's interesting, because it's absolutely a character flaw, because like at a certain point I was like, I can't just not be a writer. This is who I am. Like I'm a writer, and I need to write things. And the convergence of the whiskey was really just, my friend Joan calls it kismet. It was totally a coincidence. I was working part-time at the liquor store, and my kids were little, because I needed to get out of the house and be at a place where there were no children for a few hours a day. And I was really into the farm to table movement. And I went there thinking I better learn about wine, because I had spent a lot of time working in food service. I had been a food service manager, a short order cook, a whole bunch of other things in food service. And I was like, okay, so I'll learn about wine, and that'll give me a new marketable skill when I go back, and I can maybe be a server, bartender, whatever, figure out what to do next. And so I very quickly learned that wine people were not my people. And because I had such a strong interest in the farm to table movement, I mean, I remember so vividly standing at the cash register one day, staring at the bourbon aisle. I was like, hey, you know what? They make that right down the road. I should probably learn about that. And, that was back when master distillers would come and do tastings and bottle signings in the store, and nobody knew who they were. Nobody cared. This was like 13 years ago. And so I started really learning about whiskey, and then met Jim Rutledge when he was still with Four Roses, and it was crazy busy. And every time I would try to go talk to him, a whole horde of people would come in, and I would have to go right back to the cash register. And then he was packing up to leave, and I had to go on break, and I was like sitting back in the break room eating my sad little peanut butter sandwich. And the next thing I knew, Jim comes through the door with bottles in one hand, cups in the other hand. And he's like, you didn't get to do my tasting. And he sat down with me for like 20 minutes and he taught me the proper bourbon tasting technique, a little bit about the history of Four Roses, like what you can taste in this bottle versus this bottle. And I retained none of it other than the feeling that like, oh my God, this is amazing. I have to tell the whole world about this. And that's when I quit my job and started writing about whiskey. And so like, it was really just this feeling that I got like, this is the path that I'm supposed to be on. And so that was really, that's really the character flaw, I guess. I think it's probably not super normal to quit your job and go in a completely different direction. But it was the right move for me at the time. And it put me on the path that I'm on now. And, like I constantly kind of get these signs reassuring me that I'm headed in the right direction. And one of those signs was, the morning that my grandfather died in February of this year, when I was sitting on my dining room floor looking through a bin of his belongings, trying to find a photo for his obituary. And I found his Jack Daniel's Tennessee Squire certificate. And I was like, wait a minute, what is Jack Daniel doing in a box with my great grandparents? And I really felt, it was a very powerful moment for me because, like I was kind of feeling a little burned out by the pace and, all the things that I do and not making a whole lot of money. And I had pitched a whole bunch of publications and not heard anything back. And I was feeling really down about my decision and really down about myself and kind of taking it personally. And then I suddenly had this like message in a bottle from my grandparents, like, hey, you're going in the right direction. We're here. We got you. Keep going. And that kind of like reinvigorated my whole outlook on being a writer. Because, I just had this strong feeling like, okay, this is a sign that I'm going in the right direction. So, I mean, that's a whole roundabout way to say like, yes, writing is a character flaw and you'll never make any money. But at the end of the day, you have to decide like if you're going to let the character flaw destroy you, I guess.
And it's worth noting, you just answered a question that I had, which was kind of what the climb looked like for you. And I think you answered it best by saying, you looked at yourself a couple of years ago and said, I accidentally became what I wanted to be. And
yeah,
between that, actually, before I forget, this is a complete throwaway question, but I'm just going to throw it there anyway, which is, when you met Jim Rutledge in the liquor store and you were eating the peanut butter sandwich, did he at least give you something to cleanse your palate first before trying the Four Roses, or was it
I had water? I
Okay.
always have a water bottle with me, like always and always. I am the best hydrated person you'll ever meet.
Good. Most people didn't make it out of the KBF so hydrated, so
I know. Well, they had the one water thing and it was stuffed way back in a corner. That was one of the things I fussed at him about. That's one of the things, like even before that, I tweeted something about there's no excuse for a whiskey festival that doesn't have water absolutely everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And I firmly believe that, like, if you're giving people free whiskey, I mean, they pay for the ticket, right? But like, then people get in there and start acting like animals. You have to give them lots of water and make them drink it.
And we got lucky this year. Last year, I heard it was horribly hot. This year, it was wonderful weather the whole time.
Perfect weather. Absolutely beautiful.
But you're right. So no one should have just gone to Costco, Walmart, just cleared the shelves of the water and just put them on stacks wherever people needed them.
I mean, really, for big events like that, a lot of the spring water companies will drive a forklift with a pallet of water into your event for you.
Exactly.
So there's no excuse for not having water absolutely everywhere.
And so we won't have time to go obviously into too many of these tonight, but I did just want to mention, because I promised it up top, just a couple of the publications that you've written for, including starting from Louisville.com, doing local writing, to the Whiskey Wash, Imbibe magazine, Entrepreneur, Cigar Aficionado, of course, writing on Medium as well, in a personal capacity, or personal professional capacity, I should say, and so many different avenues. I would say up to the point where now being content editor of American Whiskey Magazine. And you've climbed this hill, whether accidentally or not, in a way that clearly has continued to make you happy despite the bumps in the road and the needing. I completely hear you on needing that little shot of rejuvenation every once in a while.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question that I'll ask then is, for people who, I'll be honest, like myself, who are interested in writing for these publications or getting their voice out there, finding that voice, understanding that you kind of came about it accidentally, or however you'd like to describe it, looking back, what would you give as advice for getting yourself out there?
This is one of the hardest questions that I get all the time. And really the answer that I give is not what people want to hear. Like, you could not duplicate what I did at this point, because it was really a right place, right time kind of a situation. So that's a disappointing answer for a lot of people. What I recommend to people is, if you're gonna start a blog or a podcast or whatever, like, try to find a vantage point, or, some sort of common thread that's kind of different from what other folks are doing, so that you can add to the conversation. Because you're never gonna be better. You're never going to be better at Whiskey Cast than Mark is at Whiskey Cast, right? So you can't be the next Whiskey Cast. You can be something else. Or, you're never going to be better than, whatever publication you want to try to compete with. There's really no reason to compete, because there's really enough space for everybody if you can find that unique vantage point from which to cover it.
I agree. Like I said, very honestly, it's something that I read these whiskey magazines, be it American Whiskey Magazine, Whiskey Advocate, Bourbon Review, and when I'm trying to write for my own site, exactly what you said, trying to just figure out what's my vantage point, what am I adding, and just switching to a personal note just for a second on that. I have found that I've been writing a lot less recently, actually, for the reason that I was writing like a full-fledged 500 to 1,000 word review a day for a long time. And basically taking off Wednesdays when the podcast episode would go live, and maybe a weekend day. But 2 years ago, I did the September of Stag for Bourbon Heritage Month. And every day I managed to get samples at the time of every George T. Stag and every Stag Junior that had been released. And I tried them all blind for 30 days.
Wow.
It took 3 per day for 30 days, or 2 per day, something like that. And I was writing these reviews and it was just burning me out.
Yeah.
Because there's only so much. And so I decided, both consciously and unconsciously, that instead I'm going to do some video reviews. I'll post them on Instagram, do some written ones where I feel like I have something to add. So like when favorite examples, like when Doc Swinson's came out with their French Toasted, which was one of my favorite releases of last year. They used instead of using a used French oak, they used brand new French oak from a specific forest in France, one of the 5 noble forests. And so instead of just doing the review, I went into a whole discussion of the history of the forest, why the Tyloses in this wood were different than ones you would find in American oak, why French oak is a different ester and guaiacol profile, and all these things. Because there I felt like I could add something. I had the scientific background that I could do something, but I'm not going to necessarily write a review, or I'm just looking around at my desk right now, and honestly, everything on here I want to write about, but I'm not going to be able to because there's just not enough time and there's not enough things to say. And being
that's why I don't do reviews out of self-defense.
Yeah, now it's like 1 or 2 a week now, maybe, and of those full length ones, because it's just I appreciate being sent things, but there's also so many things I just can't review. I just don't have time.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do a BTAC review, one, because I don't get them, but also, and I'm not going to ask for them because,
everybody else is doing that already.
Exactly. Where I'm better off looking at a brand like Glens Creek is one of my favorite ones to talk about. Yeah. Because not enough people are talking about them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love spotlighting the smaller producers. But to your point, there was a point in time about a year and a half ago when every time it came time to do my whiskey and cigar pairing column, I just absolutely dreaded it. And I would push it off. I would procrastinate until the last possible second to do it. And then at a certain point, I was like, you know what? If drinking whiskey and smoking cigars is this agonizing, maybe it's time to take a step back from it. And so I handed that column off to a colleague for a while because I was just like, I kind of don't want to do this anymore. And then I started to feel like, okay, I kind of missed this. And so I took it back over. And I've done 2 in a row now. And so, like it was nice to have that break though. Sometimes you have to just you have to get this perspective of, you know what, if drinking whiskey becomes a chore, it is time to step back.
100%. 100%. All right. With that, I'm going to end with lighter question again.
Okay.
Which is your just about family history.
Okay.
So you've got, if I heard this correctly, you've got family history going back to the Daniel Boone days in Kentucky, or in the area, I should say.
Yep.
And so in some ways, you kind of have bourbon and whiskey in your blood. And I tend to think that, or I tended to think, I should say, that everyone in Kentucky drank bourbon and all that, but I've grown to realize it's not true. Most, but not true.
Pretty close to true.
Yeah. And on the other hand, you had a great quote. You said that bourbon is like wallpaper in Kentucky. It's everywhere in the background, but you don't really notice it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. You said wine people weren't your type. I know there was like the pinky thing and the snobbery that had to go with it.
Yeah.
Were your parents or anyone else in your family particularly interested in bourbon drinking, and was there a
not
culture that
particularly? No, it was not something that I grew up with. And I have an actually really funny story. So my grandfather passed away, my mother passed away this year, my aunt, my cousin, we've had a really rough year in the family.
It's been one of those years.
Yeah, it's been really rough. And then, but I've been working really hard for the last couple of years, trying to find some answers to genealogy questions that I had, and my grandpa gave me a lot of information before he passed away. There's one thing that I'm kicking myself that I didn't get from him, which is where his grandparents are buried, because I cannot find them right now. But he gave me a tremendous amount of information before he passed away. And so some of the things that I would look at, I would get sucked down these rabbit holes, and I would go down, a line of genealogy until I found something that I couldn't get past it. And so I have this 70-something, I'm not allowed to say actually how old she is. She's a 70-something BFF from the Bronx. Her name is Joan. I call her Joni from the Bronx. And she's really just a crackerjack genealogy researcher. And so I got stuck on one of the lines trying to connect a couple of people. And I was like, I'm stuck on this person. Can you see what you can figure out? She just has a vast knowledge of all the different tools and where to look for things and all that kind of stuff. And so she calls me up and she was like, was Evan Williams a real person? And I was like, Yeah, he was the wharf master. He had a brick making company and he was a distiller. Yep, that he was a real guy. I think he married into your family. And I was like, wait, what? Yeah, he married Hannah Butcher's daughter. And I was like, oh, no way. And so I'm not a direct descendant, but he married my like fourth or fifth great grandfather's sister. And so when you live in Kentucky, these are common stories, right? Because,
Yeah.
like we have this resurgence of these brands and they're like my great 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 grandpappy's special recipe. It's never their special recipe. It's whatever they can buy from other distilleries. But like they have that story, they have that connection, and it's a legitimate connection. And they didn't know that person, obviously, but like that history is definitely there. One of the brands that's making a comeback right now is McBrayer. William McBrayer was a judge, and he was instrumental in some of the early legislation around bourbon in Kentucky. And some of his descendants who are actually still McBrayers. A lot of times, those names disappear over time, but they're actually still McBrayers. They're bringing back the McBrayer family legacy. So that's pretty cool to see. When you have somebody like Steve Beam, who is a Beam on his dad's side, but a Dant on his mother's side, like that Steve Fonte said something really funny the other day. He said he wasn't born, he was distilled. And I was like, that is hilarious and also probably true. So it's really interesting to see all these folks. When you go digging, if you look far enough back, if you're actually from Kentucky, you're going to find some distillers. And really, like, they don't even have to be commercial distillers, because this was an agricultural product. Everybody was making it. Everybody, they needed something. They needed a commodity product to be able, value added commodity product to be able to sell on the market to get the money that they needed for all the things that they were trying to do.
I spent a fantastic afternoon with Stephen Fonte. He toured me around Cave Hill Cemetery. And we got drinks at Neat with Bernie Lubbers. It was one of the best afternoons of my life.
That's
but that
awesome.
He's got some stories, and he's I think hands down one of the top 2 or 3 best storytellers in this industry.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and, he has a gift for it. He has the showmanship gene.
Yeah, and my favorite thing he said was that there are no secrets in Kentucky bourbon because the Beams get together at Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's too funny.
And I mean, as you said, if you dig a little deeper, you'll find a Beam, a No, one of a Dant, a Russell,
yep,
some at just all of them, and it's fascinating. You can get this diversity that you have in Kentucky whiskey and Kentucky bourbon in particular, all kind of fruit of the same very wide tree. And
yes,
but it makes it fun.
One of the kind of crass things that people say is you're not supposed to talk about how everybody's related in the Kentucky bourbon industry because they're all a lot more closely related than people would like to admit.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been a fantastic interview. Thank you so much for coming on. Hope you enjoyed as much as I have.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And hang on with me for just a minute after I finish recording.
Okay, you got it.
I would say there were a couple things we didn't get to tonight just for time's sake, because otherwise this interview could just keep going.
Because I talk too much. It's okay. You can say it.
No, it's all. I would say like I said, I had a ton of questions because I knew it was going to be a different kind of interview. But I want to just highlight quickly your interest in American single malts, your interest in heritage grain movements. You mentioned Steve Bayshore at George Washington. You've also spoken about Rose and Rye in other contexts. So these are just 2 things that were on my list, but I'm going to pare down for tonight. But I am interested in your writing on them. I would also say for listeners to take a look at the most recent issue. There we go. blanked on that word for a second. The most recent issue of, I believe it's American Whiskey Magazine, for an interview with Tracy Franklin that Maggie conducted. It was a wonderful article to read, an interview. Tracy was one of the first 2 recipients of the Jack and Nearest initiative.
That's Whiskey Mag Online. Yeah, that was Whiskey Mag Online. I was like, wait a minute. So she's actually, I also interviewed her for Relish and Whiskey Magazine. She's on the cover for that one.
There we go. Okay, so I saw that cover, and that's why I had my confusion in my notes between them. So yes, Whiskey Mag Online, it is available now.
It's okay. I do too many things.
It's not a bad thing. Like, we seem to be kind of kindred in the way. Like, you seem like you're not happy if you're not busy.
Yeah.
So
it's the ADHD.
So with all that, tons to read. It's got hundreds of articles. Take a look at them. You can listen to her, obviously, on this podcast if you've been listening, but also the ones that I'll link in the show notes to hear how I got to these questions. Thank you again to Maggie, and also to our new sponsors who make this podcast possible. You'll see them in the show notes as well. With that, I'll see you all next week.
Thanks, David.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.